5. Um, this lecture is going to be probably a little longer than usual, just because there's some things we have to go over. Um, Lots of housekeeping, and then like a lecture and a half rather than usually just one. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to go over. Oh, sorry, hold on. The exam. Um, Okay, so obviously, two students still have not taken it, which is a problem. Not like a problem, but like is affecting this a little bit. Um, I will say this is the lowest grade that I've ever had on these exams. Um, the max grade is pretty like on par. That's usually right around where the max grade is on the first exam. The minimum is lower than it's ever been. Um, it's interesting to me how the most grades are an A and then a C and then a D. I feel like that's indicative of the time put in to prepare for the exam. However, I don't want anybody to worry. Like, this exam is not going to make or break your grade. I'd say if this happens like in the second exam, that may present a problem for your overall grade. Um, but, it's the first one. That's okay. I will say, though, like, typically students will do all right or pretty good on the first exam, and then they'll do worse on the second one. I know I've talked you through this before. I'm not quite sure why that is, whether it's you did really well, so now you don't study, or like the media PowerPoint is honestly just, I know that it's very long and there's a lot of little details and nuances within it. So, especially if you were someone who wasn't very happy with your grade on this exam, I would say that for the second one, you should like really put in the work, really study. Um, I have a lot of different studying tips. If you need them, I recommend studying by using like flashcards are really helpful for all the definitions, especially in the media lecture. I also always learn best by teaching someone. That's why I became a teacher. I think it's the best way to learn is to teach. So if you could just like explain the concepts to people or your family or your friends, study with each other and try to explain it. Maybe you know something better than they know something, and vice versa. You could teach each other. Um, I also recommend like just having the study guide out and just writing as much as you remember from that specific topic, and then going through the notes after the fact and adding anything that you missed and like really realizing why you missed it or that you didn't remember that piece. Just like reading through the notes over and over again, I don't think is going to be very helpful. It might be helpful for some people. It's never been very helpful for me. I do much better in like active practice. Um, so if however you studied didn't work for you this time, I'd switch it up. Feel free to email me. Feel free to message on Discord. Guys, we can also always have like a review session, right? If anyone feels like they need it, I can just we can schedule an hour. I'll be on Google Meet. Anyone can just show up, ask questions. We can talk through stuff. I don't want to put that on you if no one's going to show up. I especially don't want to put that on myself if no one's going to show up. But it seems like we may need it. So here's what I'll do. For the second exam, I'm just going to set up maybe like 2 1-hour review sessions. I'll put the link in the Discord and on the Brightspace page. And then for that hour, I'll just be on Google Meet. I'll probably be working or something. So if you like show up, you need to tell me that you're there. And we can just talk through things. We'll do review if you have questions. I won't be like there to teach you again. That's not the point. That's what these lectures are for. But I will be there if you have questions. So if you're like, hey, I really don't understand this media term, I can answer your questions. But don't show up thinking that I'm going to like go through the lecture again, because I probably won't. This will be a student-led thing. If you have questions, I'll be there to answer them. It'll be a set time. Um, I think what I'll also probably try to do is figure out a way to do like, I don't know if I could like create a review quiz for you. I don't know how to, like, how best to execute that. Um, I'll see what I can do. I'll look around, see how to figure that out. Um, but that's what I'll do for the second exam. So if you didn't get what you expected to on this one, no big deal. Don't worry about it. But worry about it in so much as you'll study more for the second exam. If you have questions about what you missed on the exam, please let me know, especially if it was any of the like kind of foundation information, like if you missed anything talking about the social contract, or if you missed content about the ideological graph or political parties. Like all of this stuff is foundational, and even though I might not have exact direct questions on the next exams, it will be content and you'll have to understand it. So if you missed any of the foundational stuff, we should talk because you're going to need it for the next one. And if you don't know it, you're going to miss it again. Okay, so that's the exam stuff. Now I'm going to go over real quick what our next couple of weeks looks like. Let me open the syllabus. All right, so we got through our exam. We did the media PowerPoint. I'm going to give you Federalism today. And then Friday, guys, is your assignment 1, your Federalist papers. So this is already on Brightspace. I'm going to go through it in a second. Next week is your essay 1. So I'm going to go through the rubrics with you, and I'm going to do APA format. And that's why this lecture is going to be a little longer. But remember, all of these things are on Brightspace. You can access all of them on your own time whenever you need to. I just want to give you like 2 weeks in advance that your essays due next Friday, October 4th. We'll also be going over Congress. Sorry, I need to take that off. We'll also be going over Congress, and then that will be the end of that section, okay? So on the 18th of October is your second exam, and it will only be over these 3 topics: media, federalism, and Congress. The presidency will not be on it. As you can see, we've also worked in like an extra week here. Usually presidency takes 2 full weeks to get through if we're doing it during class time. Obviously, we won't need that because I'll just be presenting the information to you, so you'll just get it this week. From there, the lectures are going to move up a little bit, but we'll have this extra week worked in, right? So on October 14th, I'll upload the judicial lecture, and then we'll be moved up. What that will do is give us an extra week here at the end of the semester, which I'm hoping and planning we can use that. I mean, I'll obviously be doing my own stuff, and I'm sure you guys will as well. So we'll need to figure out how that will look. But I'm hoping that having that extra week will give us lots of time to prep for the final, whether that's more time to sit on a Google Meet and I'll wait for you to ask questions. Maybe we can just do a second like review lecture that will go over all of the things that will be on your final exam, and we'll go over the homework too. Like we can go through all of these things as an extra lecture since we do have this extra week worked in, usually because this PowerPoint takes a long time and because usually one of these days in either semester is like a break day. So that's what our next couple of weeks looks like. We already did exam 1. Your Federalist papers are due this Friday, September 27th, and then your first essay is next Friday, October 4th. Media, Federalism, and Congress will all be on exam 2, which is Friday, October 18th. Write this stuff down, guys. You need to be looking at this. You need to have a calendar or a planner, and you need to know when these things are happening. Because I get on here every week and I lay out what these weeks look like. And then I get emails that like you didn't know something was happening, which is fine, right? Like I said, we have this little section at the end of the syllabus that you guys are all going through other things. You're all doing other things. I'm also doing other things. But like these things don't change, and if they do change, I'm pushing them back, which is giving you more time. So you really need to be on top of this. I also recommend watching the lectures earlier in the week, right? Like if you're not watching this lecture till Friday, and then that's when you find out that our Federalist papers are due, that's probably going to present a problem for you, even though I have been telling you since like 2 weeks ago that they would be due this day. Anyway, so that's what our weeks look like. Now I'm going to go through the Federalist papers to make sure that you know what it is, know what it's over, know what's happening. Right, go up here to assessments, go to assignments. Actually, sorry, go to content. Well, you can go to assessments too. Go to content. Go down here, homeworks and assignments. Federalist 10. Read it. Federalist 51. Read it. And then it's just 10 questions. That's all it is. 5 from each paper. And then just turn it in. So it's here in content under homeworks and assignments. You can also go to assessments, go to assignments, and then here, Federalist papers. If you just click on this, it will open it for you. I have to click on edit because I have the teacher version, right? It'll open this for you, guys. And here it is, attached. Federalist 10, Federalist 51, and then the actual questions. You can submit it however you want. You can turn it in the Dropbox. You can email it to me. If you email me a Google Doc, please, please, please make sure that I can actually access it. Like, let me show you how to do this. All right, so let's say, here's a Google Doc. Go up here to share. Make sure you change this. Anyone with the link can, I don't really care what you put this on. Commenter would probably be best, so I can add comments if I need to, but viewer is also fine. And then make sure you're copying the link, and then you type it out in a little email and email it to me. If it's restricted, I cannot see it. If you have this little University of Akron one, you could select that one. I think it might still be difficult for me to access if I'm like immediately loaded into my Oregon email, or like if it is opened by like my general email. So I'd recommend you just hit anyone with the link, and then viewer or commenter, whatever, it doesn't matter, but I need to be able to see it. If you don't do that, I can't see it, aka I can't grade it, aka you didn't really turn it in. If you turn it in ahead of time, I'll email you and say, hey, I don't have access. And then you can probably give it to me after the fact, but that just takes more time. No one wants to do that. It's extra work on your end. Just do it from the beginning. So that's that. That's where you find all of that stuff. Now, your essay. Usually, I would have you vote, and then everyone would write the same essay. Excuse me. I think that that's kind of like, I mean, it's difficult, number one, because this isn't in person, and we can't just hands up vote. But also, number two, like, I have to read the same essay over and over again. It gets kind of tiring. But also, like, you're all writing the same thing. And maybe you're just not interested, right? Like, half the class is voting. So here's what we're just going to do. You just pick. You have these two options. Paper 1. So go to content, scroll down to essays, and then pick one of these. Here's your rubric. Your rubric is your prompt. There's no, like, one-page question. There's no, like, tell me about this. This is the rubric. These are the questions. These things. This is what you're answering. And then your points, based on how you answered the question. Here are your requirements. It has to be 1,000 words. You also have to have 3 scholarly sources. I'll get into that. So this one is about ideology, which is our citizenship ideology PowerPoint. Um, all of this information is in the PowerPoint. You can pull it up, watch the lecture, and then just talk about it. Please, please, please email me if you don't have questions, or if you have questions. If you have a question and you don't email me or ask me about it, and then you just write the essay and you turn it in, the chances that you didn't answer the question correctly are much higher. The chances that you're going to miss points are much higher. If you have questions about any of these topics, if you don't understand what it's asking, please don't speculate. Just email me. I'll answer it. We'll be good. Your second option is your media cycle, which is the lecture that we just covered. And again, here are your questions. You can pick either one. Same requirements, 1,000 words, 3 scholarly sources. You just pick whichever one of these two. You don't have to tell me ahead of time. You could just pick one and then submit it. They're also here. If you go to assessments, assignments, and then you go down to essay 1, they should both be, yep, they're both attached. So it's also here in the assignments. And again, submit it however you want. You can upload it to the Dropbox. You can email it to me. Make sure I have access so I can open it. The Federalist paper is obviously due first. The essay is next week. I think that's all that. So what I'm going to do now is go over the APA format, which is how I expect you to write these essays. Essay 1 and Essay 2 will both be in APA format. I know you guys have probably learned MLA. That's probably what you're used to using. However, we're going to use APA. So I'm going to teach it to you. But again, if you have questions, please email me or Discord me, because you don't want to just submit the essay not really knowing, not really being sure if you're doing the right thing, and then you get points taken off. That's a dumb reason to get points taken off. Like, you have earned those points, you deserve those points, and I want to give them to you. So, if you have questions, just email. Also, the APA format PowerPoint that I'm about to go over with you is here too. It's not with the normal lectures, it's just going to be with the essays. But you can see all of the slides. All right, there's only 10 slides, so we're going to go over it very, very quickly, so I don't take up too much of your time. But again, you can look at it whenever you want, and I hope that you'll email me with questions if you have them. Okay. So the first thing that you need in APA format is your cover page and then your references page. Your cover page should have a running head, which is, sorry, I haven't had enough coffee today, which is a shortened title, or like however short you can get it, and then also your page number. The running head is going to be on the top left, the page number is on the top right, and then in the middle of the page, we have your title, your name, and then the institutional affiliation. This is basic. A lot of other professors and schools will require also that you would have like my name, and you would have the date the assignment is due. Not the date that you wrote it, the date that it's due. You don't have to do that. I'm not requiring it, but you should know that that is a part of APA. All I'm requiring is a title, your name, and then the University of Akron. Your references page is going to be at the very, very end. And this is how I'm going to know what scholarly sources you used. So again, it has a running head, it has a page number, and then you title it. You title it references. And then you have your actual references. And I'll show you how to do this. But basically, they're in alphabetical order, right? So B and then F. This is how you cite. Just an example. So you need the author name, last name, comma, first initial of the first name. period, parentheses, the date that it was published, end parentheses, period, the title, period, the publisher, italicized, period. And then oftentimes, right, you're going to be submitting something you found online. So you would say retrieved from, and then the link that you got it from. You also, if you're including like an online link, you should also have the date that you opened it. That should be very last. I'm gonna skip ahead real quick, but we'll come back. Okay. I'm gonna show you how to do this real quick. If you're having issues also, did I close? No, I didn't. With your citing, go to Purdue OWL. You're at your homepage. APA guide. And then you can select what you need, right? So if you're doing in-text citations or your reference list and it's an online electronic source, hit that. And there you go. It'll tell you exactly how to cite it. Apparently we're not citing the date that you accessed it anymore. Interesting. Okay. I guess you don't have to cite that then. But you're using this. What you can also do, guys, and I'm going to encourage this, put your link in, right? So let's do an article, I don't know. For, this is example sake. This is not how we're finding scholarly articles. All right, but let's say I'm going to cite this article. Copy your link. Copy it into here. Use citation machine. And then follow the steps. Make sure you're infilling the information, right? So like there's information here that they don't have sometimes, depending on the source. Make sure that you're putting it in. Usually, okay, so you have to watch an ad right now. Usually you only have to watch an ad like every 4 or 5, but since this is my first one, I'm not going to make you watch an ad. But basically, you do all of this, and then it will just cite it for you. And then you can just copy it in. If you're on Google Docs, it will also have a thing where you can do that too. So if you go to extensions, add-ons, maybe it's in tools, it's not, it's in add-ons. Oh my god. Extensions. Get add-ons. Here it is. Bib citation. Install it. That's annoying. Okay. Use a Google account that allows you to install it. And then when you go to extensions, it will list it right here. You'll have a little pop-up over here on the right-hand side. Same thing. You'll copy in your URL into your little pop-up, and it will cite it for you. I encourage you to use this. There's no reason you shouldn't use it. However, the flip side of that is that you have to check your citations. And if you don't check your citations, I'll see it because I can see when the citations are wrong. And then I'll copy your little link and I'll see what information you didn't care to include, and you'll lose points. If you're not citing it properly, you're still plagiarizing. At the very least, you'll lose points. At the very most, you could be expelled for plagiarizing. I'm probably not going to do that to you unless it's like really, really bad. Because this is, I'm assuming, your very first time doing APA format. But you can and you will be by someone else if you're not citing correctly and if it's an ongoing issue. So please, use a citation machine, let it cite it for you, but just cross-reference, guys. Just go here, find what you're looking for, and then just cross-reference and make sure it's right. It really doesn't take much time. If you're having issues figuring out how to cite something or how to check your citations, let me know. I also recommend an outline. I'm sure you all know what an outline is. I recommend that you use it. I recommend you use it with the rubric to make sure that you know what's happening. I will always take rough drafts. I will take rough drafts up until like 2 days before the paper's due. So if you submit a rough draft to me on Monday, I'll read it and I'll tell you exactly where you're going to get points and where you're going to lose points, and you can fix it that way. Please don't send me a rough draft like the day the paper's due. I'm not going to be able to get feedback to you quick enough for you to fix it quick enough to turn it in on time. So give us both a couple of days, but I'll always take a rough draft. I'll also look at outlines. I'll look at half of a finished paper, whatever you have. Obviously, we need structure. Again, I'm assuming that you know how to write an article, or you know how to write a paper, or you know how to write anything. You have an intro, and then you're going to give me the background, follow the thesis, answer the prompts, apply the theories, have a conclusion. You can use subtitles if you need to, but they're not transition sentences. So like if we're looking at the rubric and you're talking about the difference between ideology and political party, and then you move into the core values, you can have a subtitle that says core values, but that's not a transition. You need to have a sentence at the end of this paragraph introducing core values, and or a sentence at the beginning of this section referencing how it applies to ideology and political party. There has to be a transition. Your subtitle, not a transition. Subtitles, however, are very helpful for matching up, right? So like, I'll know exactly where to find your description of the quadrants if you have a subtitle. People like them, some people don't like them. Use them if you want. They are not transition sentences. You will lose points. Here's the big thing. You need academic sources. You can get these from a library database. You can get them from Google Scholar. You can get them from gov sites. Any URL that ends with .gov is a government site. Research sites, anything that ends in .edu is also a scholarly source. Here's how you can find stuff. Google Scholar. Okay, now type in what you want. .edu, Science Direct, but it's a .com, but it's been peer reviewed. That applies. ResearchGate, SagePub, JSTOR, these are all research publishers. You can use these. These are scholarly sources. If you go to the University of Akron homepage, libraries, type up here. Oh my god. Sorry, hold on. Here you go. These are all scholarly articles. All of them. I don't even know how many there are here. Probably hundreds. At least 20. At least 20 on the first page. These are scholarly articles. These are scholarly articles. Legislation by Congress. AI overview, not a scholarly article. These are all pretty good. The White House. .gov. Scholarly article. Congress.gov. Scholarly article. Senate.gov. House.gov. Govinfo.gov. I wouldn't use this one. Well, maybe you could. But I'm assuming anything that's going to be on this one will also be on one of these Congress, Senate, or House.govs. So I would just use those. USA.gov. .gov. Good source. You can use this. Any of these things are good sources, and you can use them. Some of them, Google Scholar, it will cite it for you. Look at that. How helpful. There's no excuse to not have scholarly articles. There's no excuse to not cite them properly. You can also use our slides. Here's how you would cite our slides. So my name, the year of the slide, and then the theory or the topic or whatever you're getting it from. You only need this little A or B if you're using more than one PowerPoint, right? So if you're just using one, you just need 2023. But if you're using the citizenship PowerPoint and the history PowerPoint, you need to assign them these little letters so we know which one you're using. Here it is at the end of your paper. Here it is in your in-text citations. All of those are scholarly academic sources. This part is really important. You're making the argument. You're finding research and evidence to support your claims. For this reason, there are limits on quotes. You cannot have more than 5 in the entire paper, and they cannot be longer than 1 to 2 sentences. Any more than that, and at that point, you're just letting someone else write your paper for you. This should be your information, your writing, your argument. Here's a couple of notes. Anytime you use a quote, it needs to have an in-text citation. If it doesn't, it's plagiarism. Again, it's not your argument. Make your own argument. And you're quoting individuals, not articles. So you wouldn't say Pew Research said. You would say Washington said, and then cite the Pew Research article. Again, I'll take any rough drafts. If you turn in a rough draft and then I give you feedback and then you turn the same rough draft in as your final, you're going to lose points. Make the edits. Including more than grammar stuff. Make sure you have transition sentences. Make sure your in-text citations match your references. You can't have one and not have the other. If it's in the references, it should have an in-text citation. If it has an in-text citation, it should have a reference. Be clear and concise. You know all of that. We went to quotes. So an in-text citation. What is an in-text citation? An in-text citation literally goes in the content of your paper. So your references go at the very, very end. Your in-text citations are within the paper. You use them primarily when you're quoting, but also if you're using a reference, right? Party polarization has increased in the last 12 years. That's not common knowledge. You don't know that. Cite it, even if it's not a direct quote. In-text citation is not a full citation. So it oftentimes is just the last name and the year before the punctuation of the sentence. So, party polarization has risen in the last 12 years. Parentheses, last name, year, end parentheses, and then you put the period. There's no period and then the in-text citation. The in-text citation is part of the sentence. Here's just other examples if you have more than one author. If you don't have an author, what you do if there's no date, and then if multiple sentences come from the same source, you would just put it at the very end of like those 2 or 3 sentences. Purdue OWL also gives you in-text citations. So you can find the information here if you need to read through it more. Again, you use these little letters if you're using multiple works from the same author. And if you're using our slides, you need to include the side number in the in-text citation. Here are just a couple of examples of how you can use an in-text citation. And then here is the references page. So that is generally how you should be writing these essays. If you have questions, thoughts, or concerns, feel free to message me on Discord or email me. I can explain this to you further. But here is your Purdue OWL, and then this PowerPoint is here in the essays section. And you can just go through it again. Perfect. Okay. We're going to do federalism now. I know this lecture is getting a little long. So, federalism. We're going to talk about the branches of government, what federalism is, the main tasks of government, the relationship between the branches, checks and balances, separation of powers, and then states' powers and relationships. Government has 3 tasks. All governments need to be able to legislate, which is to literally make laws. They need to be able to administer, which is to literally execute the laws, and then adjudicate, which is to interpret the laws. The separation of powers, people often use separation of powers and checks and balances interchangeably. They're not the same thing. The separation of powers requires that each of our branches handle each of the responsibilities. So Congress makes the laws. The president executes the laws, and our court system interprets the laws. That's the separation of powers, is what they're actually able to do. So our legislative branch is created by Article 1 of the Constitution, which is Congress. It's bicameral, means there are 2 houses. We have the House of Representatives, right, which is based on proportion, and then we have the Senate. Every state gets 2 people in the Senate. States get proportional in the House. So if you have a bigger population, you get more representatives. Wyoming only has 1 House representative because their population is so low. That means everyone in the state elects both senators and the House representative. In Ohio, we have 15 or 16 House representatives, which means everyone elects from the same 2 senators, but depending on where you live, you have a different representative in the House that you're electing. The executive branch is outlined by Article 2, and it's responsible for executing the laws. The founders were worried about this because of tyranny, right? We had just fought the Civil War, the Revolution against England, right? Like, we didn't like the king, so we fought a war to get rid of the king. So the executive branch was created with the legislative and the judicial to limit its power, so it wouldn't ultimately become a king. It did provide stability, like we had one singular leader of the government. We only have one. If you remember, the New Jersey plan wanted to have multiple presidents. That did not get out. We only have one president. And it is chosen by the Electoral College. So yes, even though we vote for president, we do not pick the president. We'll go over the Electoral College more when we talk about the presidency, but it's important to remember that the only people we ever elect are Congress. in our federal government. They can also be impeached for treason and high crimes. And then the last branch is our judicial branch, which is created by Article 3. They interpret laws, determine what it means to break the law, and then they judge whether a law that Congress or the president has passed is constitutional. This is considered to be the least dangerous branch of government by our framers, and they have what's called judicial review, which is the ability to judge constitutionality that was not given to them by the Constitution. The Supreme Court heard a case in 1803 called Marbury versus Madison, which you'll have the opportunity to review during our case brief if you so choose. And basically, this is a case that the Supreme Court heard to give themselves the power to judge constitutionality. So those are our three branches. We'll come back to them in more detail over our next sections. So we're going to talk about them in order. First Congress, then the executive, and then judicial. So again, what is the definition of separation of powers, and then checks and balances? What is the difference? The separation of powers assigns each of the three branches their own powers. The checks and balances is what allows each branch to exercise some power over the other. So essentially, the separation of powers is what each branch can do on their own. And then the checks and balances is what each branch can do over another. So the checks and balances looks like this. And this is a handout that is in Brightspace. Under content, down here, additional resources. Please. There we go. Checks and balances. So any of the little graphics that you'll see in our slides, you can access right down here in additional resources. So basically, here we are, right? We vote. We vote for all the people. We do not vote for the Supreme Court. We vote for the president, or we vote for our state legislatures, who then often are choosing the court representatives. The president is choosing who sits on the court. We do elect our House and Senate. We do vote for president, but the president is chosen by the Electoral College. Oftentimes, whoever the people elect is who the Electoral College elects. That's not how it always works. That's not how it worked in 2016. So, all these little arrows are examples of checks and balances. We'll be very simple here. The president can veto bills that Congress has passed. However, Congress has to be the one to ratify a treaty or approve a presidential appointment. So if the president is trying to put someone in their cabinet or as an ambassador or as a Supreme Court justice, they get to pick, but then Congress has to approve them. Congress also has to ratify treaties, and Congress can reduce funding for agencies of the executive branch. The president can make executive orders, but they can also veto bills. And they can choose whether or not to implement a law that Congress passed. Congress can override a veto. They can also impeach the president. Moving up, Congress confirms or denies judges and can also impeach judges. However, the judges decide whether a law that Congress passed is constitutional or not. And then the Supreme Court decides whether executive orders are constitutional. They also preside over impeachment hearings. So if the president is being impeached by Congress, the Supreme Court sits in on that and they preside over it. The president obviously appoints judges, and the president can pardon federal criminals if they've committed a federal crime and the Supreme Court or other courts have convicted them of this crime. The president can say, actually, I'm pardoning them and they don't have to serve time. There are tons of other checks and balances. These are just the best examples, the ones you probably hear about most. So what is federalism? Federalism is the idea of having a federal government, right, an all-ruling national government with self-governing local governments, right? So we have local governments, you have a mayor, you have city council. Then we have state governments, we have a governor, and we have a state congress, we have state courts. Then you move up and you have a president with a congress and a Supreme Court. There are multiple levels of government. That's federalism. Each level has their own jurisdiction, power given by the citizens. So if you are, I don't know, what is like a small crime? Right, when you get a speeding ticket and you go to traffic court, you're going to the municipal court. You're not going to the Supreme Court. But if you commit a crime in another state or you commit a federal crime, then you would go to a federal court. So they all have their own jurisdictions. The president cannot make laws about the city of Orville or the city of Cleveland or the city of Akron. Only the mayor can do that. They have their own powers. The president, when they make executive orders, are only making things that are impacted by the national government. So the agencies that are impacted, right? When they shut the government down, only government employees are impacted by that. There are other systems. Very simply, there's a unitary system, which is a central government, a federal government that has all the power, or a confederal government, which is when the local government, so you would say the mayor and city council, they have all of the power. A federalist system is when there are multiple levels of government and they each have their own power. American federalism is a partnership between states, localities, and then the federal government, right? So we have locals, we have state government, and then we have a federal government. Again, they are independent of each other. They have their own laws, through their own courts, their own legislative system. The president cannot only make a rule about Orville. Obviously, if the Orville mayor makes a law, like that's not going to impact the president, and it's not going to impact all the other states and all the other cities. So they each have their own powers. There are two main clauses that you need to know that establish federalism. The first one is the Supremacy Clause, which is from the Constitution, and it says, Constitution and laws are supreme law of the land. If state law conflicts, then federal law prevails. Which means, if Ohio makes a law that goes against a federal law, the federal law always wins. Oftentimes, cases that go to the Supreme Court will deal with this. It's like which law is the right law. And it's usually always the federal law because of the Supremacy Clause. The federal government is the supreme law of the land. Again, local governments and state governments have their own powers. They can make their own laws. But if by chance they conflict, federal law will win. This is only ever if it's really enforced, though, guys. Like, this isn't just... I mean, it's complicated because it's always true. But if no one is fighting about it, if there's no conflict, if no one is taking the issue to court, then really nothing will be done about it. So we're seeing a lot of situations, right, where states, Ohio primarily, is decriminalizing marijuana. This technically is not the case in federal government. Like, technically, the federal government still has it as a criminalized offense. No one is really like suing, right? No one is creating a problem. The federal government is saying, you know what, that's cool. State laws, they can decide what they want. And no one is coming to the federal government and saying, hey, your law doesn't align with ours. We need you to change it. Therefore, this isn't really enforceable, or it's not being enforced. Some situations, this is enforceable, right? So think about like the abortion issue and how Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision. So abortion, Roe v. Wade, was legal with the federal government under the privacy clause in the Constitution. That's how they legalized it in the 70s, is through the idea of medical privacy. Well, obviously, some state governments were having more restrictive bans. This was brought to the federal government, right? A state that had a more restrictive ban than the federal ban, or the federal legalization, brought it to the court system, and it went all the way up. They kept hearing the case until it got to the Supreme Court. And when it went to the Supreme Court, we had a majority conservative judges, which we'll get to later on in a couple of slides, like PowerPoints, who ultimately ruled that you can't do that anymore, right? Like an abortion is no longer legal. Medical privacy isn't really what that clause was supposed to be in the Constitution. Therefore, they overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, that gets into a lot of other topics, like precedent and the actual overturning of previous decisions. We'll talk about that when we talk about the judicial system. But generally speaking, ultimately Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision because state law and federal law were conflicting, and someone created a conflict out of it. The marijuana issue, no one's creating a conflict out of it. Therefore, the federal government is letting the states do what they're doing, even if it does conflict with federal law. Sometimes there's a conflict, and federal law will always prevail. If no one is bringing it to court, usually the states are just doing what they're doing. They can do what they want. It's very often not enforced. And then the second one is the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, which is the one that arguably people say gives Congress the most power, because it says Congress has the power to make laws not outlined in the Constitution, which means the president can only do what the Constitution says they can do. The Supreme Court can only do what the Constitution says they can do, until Marbury versus Madison, when they gave themselves more power. Congress is the only branch that has a clause in the Constitution that says you can do more than what the Constitution gives you. So that's why people think Congress is the most powerful branch. This is arguable. Some people don't think that, and we'll get into other reasons. But this is why people would think that about Congress. We're hearing a lot about states' powers, so I'm going to talk about that really quickly. Again, the federal government, and then the state government, and then the local government is federalism, having different branches. States' powers is what they can do. So the federal government and the state government do share some powers. This is often confusing and controversial. And what gives states the right to have their powers is the 10th Amendment, which says that powers not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, so powers that are not given to the federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states, right? So powers not given to the federal government and powers not taken from the state government are reserved to the states or to the people. Similar to the necessary and proper clause, right? Congress can make any laws not specifically given to them by the Constitution. States can make any laws not taken from them, from the Constitution, or already given to the federal government. So we have a lot of issues of concurrent powers, right? Again, we've touched on the abortion issue. We've touched on the legalizing drugs issue. COVID-19 was a big one, right? The federal government wasn't really shutting down. Some states were, some states weren't, and they had the power to do so. Same-sex marriage was another big one that was legalized in a lot of states before it was ultimately legalized by the Supreme Court in 2015. And then education is also a big one, right? We've had programs like No Child Left Behind, which was a federal program, like getting curriculum set for states, but also states have their own board of education, they have their own superintendents, and they have their own system set up to outline what education looks like in the states. Here are a couple of examples of how the federal government controls state governments. So they have categorical grants, block grants, and then unfunded mandates. Categorical grants is when the federal government gives a state money to run specific programs. So like No Child Left Behind, right? The federal government gave, this is just an example, the federal government said, you have to run No Child Left Behind. We're going to give every state $1 billion to do it. Use that for however you need to use it to run the program, right? A block grant is for federal money to a state for a broad purpose. And they said, state, you can allocate this however you want. So a categorical grant is very specific. You have to use it for No Child Left Behind. A block grant is very, very broad. We implemented Obamacare, and we said, okay, this is obviously, again, just an example. All right, every state gets $1 billion to implement Obamacare. But you can do that however you want. Right? Maybe it's a subsidy for private health professionals. Maybe it's a statewide public program to hire more medical professionals. Maybe we're going to use it to buy more equipment that will be subsidized by insurance. Maybe we're going to use it to get more publicly funded hospitals. Like however you are going to use it to implement Obamacare. Maybe it's a system that makes it easier for people to apply for Obamacare. Whatever it was, you get this money, use it for Obamacare, but use it however you want. A categorical grant is, again, very, very specific. No Child Left Behind. And oftentimes, it has even more detail than that. It's like you have to use it to buy textbooks, or you have to use it to get this specific program, or Chromebooks, right? And those are details that are specified. Block grants are very, very broad. We're giving you this money for healthcare, Obamacare. How are you going to implement it? And then unfunded mandates. No money. No money is exchanged. But it is enforced by different penalties, or other grants can be cut off. So I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's recently in Ohio the driver's license mark. Well, it's everywhere. It's a federal government thing. So what they're doing is they're implementing a new program where when you get a new driver's license, you can get a little star or a little mark on it for security, and then it can be used in place of like a passport for traveling within the country or whatever. The federal government is not giving states money to do this. They're not giving states $1 billion and saying you can use this to pay for more DMV employees or to pay for new printing machines that will print the little star. It's unfunded. The federal government is saying you have to do this, and we're not funding you for it. And if you don't do it, there will be penalties, or we'll cut off other grants. So maybe there is a grant that is paying for BMV employees separately. We're going to cut that grant if you don't implement this one. So it's more like a threat, the unfunded mandates. Categorical is money for specifics. Blocks is money for broad purposes. And then unfunded is no money exchanged, but states have to comply, or they will be penalized. There's obviously pros and cons to federalism. The pros are that there are more protection for individual rights, right? So you have multiple levels of government that are protecting all of your rights. And if one level of government is overstepping, you can go to the next level, right? You can go to court at the next level and you can sue. You can say I'm not allowed to exercise my right. And it will keep going up and up and up to ensure your individual rights. It also distributes power, so no one person can be in charge and get too strong and create a dictatorship. It allows for competition. It allows for more people to participate, right? So it's more than just, I'm in government. Like, you can be in multiple levels of government. There's a lot of different campaigns. There's a lot of ways to volunteer. There's a dozen different people to vote for on your ballot every year. More people get to participate. And there's also multiple access points, similar to that point. Like, you can just get in multiple different ways. You can be a candidate, you can volunteer, you can work in government. And any way you want to get involved, you can do so, and there's multiple ways to do it. The cons are generally that sometimes there's bad policies. So I mean, in terms of like, maybe the state government is creating a law and it's like pretty bad, or people are getting hurt by it, or whatever have you. There's not much of a way to counteract that because the state government is allowed to have their own power. And the federal government can't just step in every time something goes wrong. So oftentimes bad policies have like no accountability. The coordination in response to problems is also pretty bad. When we have natural disasters, like the stuff like Katrina, or you can think about the East Palestine problem, right, with the train derailment. It is difficult to figure out like who really is in charge in these situations. And once you do figure out like, okay, this person or this government is in charge, it's difficult to get the other government's involvement. Because this federalism, like, no one wants to overstep their own boundaries. Okay? So in the East Palestine problem, that was a state problem. Like, the state government was in charge of that. They were responding to that. It was Governor DeWine's thing. And the federal government got a lot of flack, a lot of pushback for not immediately getting involved. The issue being, right, that was a state issue. The federal government didn't have the right to step in. So Governor DeWine had to eventually ask, right? He went to the federal government and he said, we need help. Can the federal government help? Once that question, the request for help is sent in by the state government, only then can the federal government jump in. And once they jump in, there's still this clash, right? Because who is going to pay for everything? Who is going to send personnel, right? Who is responsible for this? And when the state governments ask for federal government help, are they immediately turning over all of their state's rights to the federal government to help? Or is it just state government only help in the way that I want you to help, right? Like, there's a lot of contradictions there. And so when stuff like natural disasters or train derailments are happening, the coordination and the response to them often takes a long time because we're trying to figure out who's going to do what and who's in charge. And are we going to ask for help or are we not? State and local governments can avoid national problems, right? Like if something is happening nationwide, state and local governments can just pretend like it's not happening because they don't have a role in it and they don't really have a power to do anything. So they're just going to pretend like everything's fine, even though it's not. It also allows local leaders to sacrifice national interest for local interest, right? Like you think about a state government, a state governor, and state Congress. Because they are only held accountable to the voters of Ohio, they're not going to make decisions that are ultimately only impactful for the state of Indiana, right? They're going to do things that are helpful for Ohio, whether or not it hurts somebody else or another state. Yucca Mountain is a big example of this. I have this little video here. I recommend you all watch it. Basically, the idea behind it here was the federal government got involved and they said, hey, we have a lot of nuclear waste in the country and we're going to think of a way to condense it, to keep it safely. So they drilled out this big mountain, which is down here in Nevada. So they drilled out this mountain, hollowed it, and they said, okay, great. Now we're going to keep all of the nuclear waste in this mountain. So states, come on, send it through. Give us your nuclear waste. We're going to keep it here in Nevada. Is that the smartest decision? So here we go, looking at this. This is obviously like very, very old. It's from 2001. But this is how much nuclear waste the states had. Ohio had 728 metric tons. And the federal government wanted us to ship it all the way over here to Nevada. How are we going to do that? In a truck? On the highway that could crash and blow up in Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and then eventually in Nevada? Do you think any of these states want the risk of Ohio's nuclear waste blowing up their state? They don't. And we sure as heck don't want New York's 2.5 dozen metric tons, or Pennsylvania's nearly 4,000 metric tons. We don't want it. What if it blows up in Ohio? Right? So again, state and local governments can avoid national problems, and the federal government is trying to fix things, but oftentimes they're not doing it properly, and this is what we get. So now we just have this massive mountain that's drilled out, and no one is doing anything about it. There's no nuclear waste in it, because New York didn't ship it to Nevada. Ohio didn't ship it to Nevada. And also, poor Nevada, right? Like, they're going to carry, at this point, multiple thousands of metric tons. That was just a bad idea. Similarly, we can look at how states are influencing the federal government. And a great example of this is the Kent State event on May 4th, 1970. I'm sure you've heard about this, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. There's a lot of stuff online about it. You can read about it. I did an interview in undergrad about it. If you want that, let me know. But, like, you can read about this everywhere. There's dozens of research and stuff. But basically what happened was the Vietnam War was going on, and a lot of people were very unhappy. A lot of people didn't want the U.S. to be in the war. They wanted us to pull out. They wanted us to leave. So there were protesters. And there was one specific protest at Kent State And a couple of days before this, there had been an arson event at the ROTC building, and a couple of downtown buildings had been vandalized. And like, that's like, it's all arguable over who was doing it, the protesters or just other kids, college kids. But it's pretty widely believed that it was a protest situation. And so on May 4th, there was a big protest right down here in this little valley. And the National Guardsman was called in to basically stop the protest and condense it. So they formed this circle around all the protesters and started throwing tear gas. Well, the protesters started throwing it back, and then they came up this hill. So the protesters retreated this way, up this hill, and then they started going down this hill into campus. Now, obviously, this is like real campus now. Like, there's buildings, and there's a parking lot, and there's dormitories, people walking to class. So the guards followed, and they were up here on this high, like, this is going downhill. So this is the high point. This is going downhill. And there's a lot of controversy over how this started. Some guardsmen say they heard an order to shoot. Some guardsmen say they didn't hear anything, but they saw other guardsmen shooting, so then they started shooting. Anyway, however it started, the guardsmen started shooting. And they shot into what was now like a disillusioned crowd. Mostly protesters, but a lot of students just walking to class. And 4 people were killed. There is a bullet hole right here in a statue. There's some bullet holes in some of the trees that were over here. It was just a massive shooting into a crowd of people. And it ended up really impacting the war. Like, this was one of the main influences that led to the U.S. pulling out. So state governments can also influence federal governments in the same way or in different ways that the federal government is influencing state governments. All right. So what's the historic shift? Like, how does federal government interact with state governments, and how much power do they have historically? The role of the federal government is always increasing. So we had situations like the Civil War and the New Deal and the Civil Rights Movement that was always increasing the role of federal government. Right? Like, we had new laws, or we had, typically it's always by new laws, public works programs, voting rights laws, any law that the federal government is creating to fix or solve or deal with any of these events that are happening will ultimately increase their role. Now, sometimes we do have a pushback where the state governments, people are really rooting for them, and they want states governments to have more power. So such an example was in the 1980s when there was a conservative shift to what was called New Federalism, basically a stronger emphasis on state governments. And how this was enacted was through a devolution of spending. So a devolution of spending, government assistance, gun control, and typically culture war issues, right? So anytime there was this push on more state government power, it was done by restricting federal funding. Federal governments got more power through legislation. State governments are often trying to get more power by losing funding, which is why oftentimes it doesn't quite last as long as the federal government increasing of power. However, oftentimes, right, in these topics or in these moments in time, when we're pushing back against the federal government having power, we often have small increases in other things, right? So when we're thinking about like a culture war issue and we want the states to have more rights, we're going to have an increase in federal government to enact that, right? So if we're pushing back on drugs, okay, we're having the federal war on drugs. Inherently, the federal government will have more power because they're trying to fix this war on drugs and give it back to the states. So the federal government is saying, yeah, state governments, you can choose to do this. And just by that simple allowing them to have a power, the federal government is still with the most power. I hope that makes sense, but let me know if it doesn't. And then the last little bit, we only have 2 slides left, is just about amending the Constitution, which is very, very difficult. It is a 2-part process, and it has to be proposed by a majority vote in both houses, Senate and the House of Representatives, or we'd have another constitutional convention like we had when we were declaring independence and forming the Constitution and all of these other things. We'd have to have another one. So representatives from all of the states would get together and they'd create an amendment, or a wide majority. So in the House, let me do the math. This would be 147 House representatives. That seems like not the right number. Maybe it is. And out of our senators, it would have to be at least 66 of them. So 145. So, okay, yeah. So 290 of our 435 House representatives, and then 67 of our 100 senators all have to agree. Or every state sends representatives to presumably the capital, and they all have to agree. Once they all agree, then it goes to the states, right? Not the federal government, the state governments. So it has to be ratified by the state Congress in 3/4 of the states, which is about 38 states, then have to adapt it. This is very, very difficult. This is not common. This does not happen often. The main thing here, too, though, is that once an amendment is created, the Supreme Court can interpret it however they want, because that's the power given to them. This is just a little practice thing I'd like you to do if you want. So when you think about like all of your, like who you are, your identity, and you lose all of that stuff, who would you go to for a new driver's license, a birth certificate, your passport, a social security card? What if you had to register to vote again? These are all different levels of government, right? Like your voting is your state government, but your social security card is your federal government. And this is how the federal system works. You are a citizen of each system. You are a citizen of your city, and you follow their laws. You are a citizen of Ohio, and you follow Ohio laws. And then you are a citizen of the federal government, and you have to follow federal laws. All right, so that's federalism. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I know this lecture was longer than usual. I think we had a lot to go over. Remember that you have the exam 1 grades, which you can see. Maybe not the best. If you aren't happy with them, please study more for exam 2. Let me know if you need help. I will set up like a free couple office hours where I'll just be sitting in a Google Meet. You can show up and ask questions. I'll also try to figure out a way to do like a more interactive review session. I might take some time on that, so bear with me. Federalist Papers is due this Friday, the 27th. You need to turn them in. There's only 10 questions. It won't take you long, I promise. And then next week, is your first essay. Please make sure you're reading over everything. Go through the APA format, go through the rubrics. It's only these two, not paper 2. Do not do that one. Only paper 1. Pick which one of the 2 you are most interested in, which one you think you know the most about. Write your essay. Remember, you can lose points for having less than 1,000 words. You can lose points for not having enough sources. You'll lose points if you're not using correct grammar, or if you're not using transition sentences, or if you're plagiarizing. You'll lose points if you're not citing things correctly. You'll lose points if you're not answering the full question. So please make sure that you're using this rubric. Like, have this rubric up while you're writing. And please email me with questions, and please send me rough drafts. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for this week. I will see you next week.